If you're applying for disability benefits or help people that are, the path to success has never been more complicated. Welcome to the Disability Expert Podcast, where we tackle the difficult issues and interview the country's top experts to help you better navigate the disability process. Winning a disability case is hard and keeps getting tougher every day. We can't promise you'll win your case by listening, but we sure think it's going to help.
This really isn't that complicated. I mean, you want to win your case, don't you? Well, then listen to what I say.
Hi, this is Chad Brown with the Disability Expert Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. I am so excited. Our guest today is one of my longtime friends, Eric Goodale, who is a highly qualified disability lawyer. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So let me tell you folks a little bit about Eric so you understand why he would be an expert we'd want to have on the show. Penn State graduate, been practicing law since 2000, practiced exclusively in the area of Social Security disability since 2005, somewhere north of 3,500 hearings he's performed in the last 15, 20 years. Works for Henson & First, excellent law firm in Raleigh, North Carolina, and has worked there since 2012. Eric and I worked together pretty extensively with the disability advocacy section of the North Carolina Advocates for Justice, where he was most recently chair, I think, last year. Has served both with NOSCR and NCAJ, frequent presenter on Social Security disability related issues. So excited. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It's going to be great.
So let's talk a little bit. It's interesting. I don't think people said this before. I don't think people sort of go to law school and say, hey, I'm going to be a disability lawyer. I'm sure there are some people who do, maybe in like the civil rights space, but like in what we do, like I don't even think I knew what it was when I was in law school. So how'd you get into disability? How'd you get into the disability law space?
Well, you're not the only one that didn't know what it was. You're right. It's not something that you aspire, I guess, to be when you join and enter law school, but kind of just happenstance for me. It was just the first job I had out of law school as a jack of all trades type of firm, and they did a bunch of things, and Social Security was one of them. And just as time went on, I seemed to get more and more cases with that. I really liked it. I liked reviewing medical records, found that interesting, I guess, to review all those things. And, I just kind of grew from there. And, it was just started to realize this is something I like. And when I went to DC after I left Syracuse, New York, that's when I just started doing Social Security full time.
You worked for a bigger national firm there, I think. You did cases all over the country before you went to Henson & First?
I did. I think I counted 38 different states and couldn't tell you how many different judges.
That was back pre-COVID, though. So that meant, were you flying all over the country doing in-person hearings at that point?
I was flying all over the country. And when I stopped that job and I lost all my frequent flyer miles, that was a little bit disappointing. It was interesting.
You landed in a good space. I've known Dave Henson's wife, Carnal, at law school with them. You're guys you work with, and, great folks, good law firm, been there for years. So you went there in 2012 into Raleigh. All you've done Social Security disability since then, right?
Yes.
It's one thing to sort of find yourself out of law school. I don't really know what I'm going to do. I've got a job. I'm jack of all trades. I mean, I used to do domestic, for goodness sakes. I swore I'd never do another domestic case if that was all I lived, And it's one thing to get into disability, and I can look back at my life and understand why I ended up as a disability lawyer. But what's kept you in this space? It's one thing to sort of end up there. It's another thing to say, hey, I'm committed to being in this space, and I'm going to work in it. So what sort of kept?
I mean, the things that brought me into it to begin with, that just my enjoyment of reading medical records has continued and grown over the years. But I think what's really kept me in it is I like the fact that it's informal. I don't mean that in the sense that it's not challenging. I mean, Social Security is extremely difficult. It's extremely complicated, more so than what it would appear on the surface. But I like the fact that we get into a hearing, the standard rules of evidence don't necessarily apply. We can kind of just cut through all the red tape and say, what's going on with this person? Let's figure it out, see if we can get them benefits. And I just like that informality of it all, and realizing like cases aren't losing because they're getting bogged down in traditional courtroom procedural nonsense, and here's what's going on and be done with it. So.
It's interesting. When I was at UNC in law school, I was there with some super smart people. People went on to become clerks on the U.S. Supreme Court, just really, really high intellects. And certainly there's a place for those folks. I know Aaron, who works for me, sort of that level guy who does our federal court work. But at another level, I always sort of like being a courthouse lawyer. Like I was a prosecutor, I was a defense attorney. I know we've had this conversation in the past where there's sort of book smart and there's street smart. To be a lawyer, you really need to be a little bit of both. But I've always sort of felt like, in these non-adversarial hearings, there's a huge advantage to being someone who maybe has a background where they've done some criminal or they've done some domestic and they've sort of been in, it's not a backroom scenario, but like, at the end of the day, there's sort of this, I want to figure out how to win. I may not, certainly there's value in knowing every rule of civil procedure and every regulatory nuance, but I always sort of view, we've been friends a long time. I've always sort of viewed you in that capacity. What do you think it takes to be a good disability lawyer?
Sounds simplistic, but, above all else, just give your clients the time. Listen to what they have to say. A lot of these people have not ever had a platform to speak and tell them, have someone actually listen to what's going on. So and sometimes it's hard. You don't have all the time in the world to listen to some of the things they need to say, but just giving them that shoulder to cry on almost sometimes, and listening to what they have to say and be respectful to them and realize that, this is just a case for us, but it's their entire life that they're dealing with. So being cognizant of that fact and not just look at them as another number of cases that you're working on, just be sympathetic.
So I know a lot of times the clients, they sort of get caught up in, well, I believe I've been disabled since this date, or this is what happened to me and this is what the medical records show. And we show up in court and, it's Judge X, and Judge X doesn't like to pay people till they're 50. And your client's really been disabled since they were 49. And you're having this sort of back and forth with them. Walk us through, you mind walking like the average person through sort of what that looks like when, maybe your client's not going to get what they want, but man, we got to find a way.
I think this really comes down to, as the attorney, being able to recognize where the strengths and weaknesses are in the case and being realistic. I have a suspicion that there's a lot of attorneys and things that will go into hearings and the client will say, I'm disabled as of such and such a date, and they'll push for that at all means, even potentially to the detriment of actually winning the case. In my opinion, I try to figure out, is the date that they're saying they're disabled, does that make sense? Does the medical record support it? Do I think the judge, which judge you get assigned to is going to have a big impact on, do we need to change that date or not? Yes, I'll try to use the date that they want as best I can, and if it makes sense. But if it doesn't, you have to have that polite conversation to explain why this may not make sense, that maybe it's better to sacrifice some past due benefits in order to get your case approved, because ultimately that's the more important thing for them, is to make sure they're getting benefits going forward. So I feel like you just need to have those honest conversations with them at times.
Pre-COVID, we did all hearings in person. And so you got to see a lot of other attorneys in the waiting rooms, and that's how we knew each other. We saw each other, we talked about things, but you also got to see a lot of client interaction between lawyers. What are your thoughts on like the issues related to communication with your client? How important is that? How in your firm, do you make sure you're having good communication with your clients? Like, how can communication break down in ways that could end up hurting your case or costing them the win? How can you just talk generally about communication? Because I think that's pretty important.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the problem in our space, not for Henson First specifically, but just for all of us who do Social Security stuff, is that the nature of it is we have to have a lot of clients. So communication is the first thing that probably crumbles, because you have so many that you can't keep on top of things. So being able to educate your clients about how our own internal processes work, and that I'm not the only one in the office that has an answer. Yes, I would understand that they want to talk to me above and all else, but knowing that, hey, we have case managers that can answer questions and provide that level of communication. Obviously, when it's me in person or talking to them on the phone, then I need to communicate as much as I possibly can within that time frame that I have for it. But I think that's the key, is just for them to understand that it's not just me. It's a team effort. We have other people that can answer their questions, and when they can't, that's when I come in. Obviously, as we get closer to the hearing, which is the end all and be all of a lot of these cases, then my role, my communication, my reaching out to them increases exponentially. So it's definitely, it can be very problematic to stay on top of it, but you're right. It's the key, especially in these types of cases.
Let's say someone comes to work with your firm, okay? Because there's a lot of different ways to handle cases. And I don't think it necessarily matters to the average client, like that they understand the nuance of how people manage cases, but I do think it's something that a lot of clients misunderstand. they don't fully understand sort of the different ways that law firms can be integrated with systems to manage your firms. I know just from conversations with Dave, over the years and conversations with you, I know you guys have very complex systems to make sure things don't get missed and your clients are really taken care of and you give them the best chance to win. So like, how do you guys run your firm? Like, what's it like for a client working with your firm from sort of the time they call and say, hey, I need some help, to the time that, you guys get them approved?
So generally what we do is, with the however many case managers that we have on staff, and right now it's just me and 2 case managers. We're about to bring on a third. Essentially, once we get and say, yeah, we want to take on the case, and we get all the initial paperwork signed, so we're the actual attorney, then it gets assigned to one of those case managers. They handle it from beginning to end. And we've just had the approach that we feel like it provides more continuity between the whole process, that the person realizes that, hey, Ashley is there all the time to answer my questions from one stage to the next. And of course, I'm behind the scenes throughout all of it and popping in and out when I need to be. Sure. But I feel like that's the way we've done it. We have other people that help with, getting our medical records and, briefing cases and things like that are on the backside that the clients don't necessarily need to have interactions with. It's primarily just focusing on that case manager and client relationship.
Yeah, I think sometimes, historically, because our firm, as we talked about this, our firm runs a little bit differently than yours. But I think sometimes clients misunderstand. They sort of think, well, because I'm not talking to the lawyer's not involved in working on my case. And that's just categorically false, right? I mean, that's not true at all in your case. So.
No, it's not. And I understand how they feel that way. I mean, the reality is they may talk to me in the very beginning, maybe spotty during the initial and recon stages, because there's just not a lot that the attorney is doing on a day-to-day. But, once you get to the hearing stage, as I said earlier, that's when they're hearing from me a lot, either by emails or calls or this or that, prepping them for the hearing. And, so that's when my role goes up substantially, even though they may not realize that then they're all monitoring.
Yeah, I know a lot of our clients over the years have seemed frustrated at times because they're like, well, Mr. Brown's not even working on my case. And I'm like, we were literally just talking about your case yesterday. Like, just because I wasn't engaging with you directly. And I think sort of the time frame as well. I mean, over the years, the time frames that people have been in disability cases have gone up and down, from in COVID, like some of the times actually got shorter. I know before COVID, I know you and I both practiced back like in 2008 and 2012 when it seemed like it was 3.5 years sometimes to get hearings. So what do you do to, like, if anything, with your clients to help them appreciate the extended waits that they go through? Because I know for our clients, that's a big source of frustration.
What do you mean by appreciate?
I mean, do you just sort of set out like day one, like this is what the time frame currently is? I mean, we track in our office data, like we generally know how long it's taking to go from stage to stage. Do you have certain protocols in place to say someone's in a stage a little too long and you're like, they've been here 12 months. They probably ought to have been here 8 months. I mean, how do you sort of reassure them that what's happening with them is not abnormal? Because I think a lot of times people everybody's got this one friend who got approved immediately. And I don't know who this guy is, but everybody knows him because all my clients talk about him.
I think it's really just right from the start, having that conversation of what the entire process is going to look like, on the assumption that they will get denied a couple of times, have to go to the hearing. If you got to go beyond the hearing, then that's another conversation. But having them understand that here's how long the initial claim level typically takes. Here's how long recon takes. How long the hearing process takes. Yes, it could be more, it could be longer. Depends on what's going on. And they need to understand, and we just have to be very upfront with them and say, we're monitoring all these things. We watch them. If it seems to be delayed at a certain level, when we're following up and trying to constantly keep your name at the top of Social Security's list. But there does come a point where, attorney or no attorney, there's just not much we can do about it if Social Security is dragging their feet. We just need to understand that as best we can. I mean, I know that's the frustrating parts. It takes forever to go through all of this, but we're kind of Social Security's pawns in that part of the game to a certain extent.
Yeah, sure. So let's pivot here a second. So we've got your client. Your client's worked through the 2-year wait. We got a case worked. You've got your hearing. You've got your in-person. Say this an in-person hearing. What are like one or two things that clients sometimes do that you think, man, I wish they hadn't done that? Like that it sort of sabotages So it's like you think, man, we got them in here. We got a decent judge. We've worked the case up. I've got a good argument, and my client shows up, and I just want to go. Or a couple of things that like you'd say, hey, whatever happens, don't do this, or some things that, per maybe clients get a little out of line that really, they're maybe not even meaning to hurt themselves.
Well, it's going to be funny the way I answer this because, and this, believe it or not, happens more than it probably should. Yeah. But having a client go into a hearing and the judge asks flat out, do you think you can work? Yes, I think I probably can. I get, it's not a lot, but sometimes you get that, and I have to restrain myself from turning with this big look of shock on my face to my client. Like, why are you telling them that? I mean, that's the one thing that I wouldn't have thought I have to tell you not to say, because that's why we're there. You don't see that a lot, but when it does happen, that has kind of left me scrambling to figure out why did you say that? I mean, were you talking about your past job, or we're talking about other jobs? And you can kind of dance around that, but you can't have the judge unhear that. So that's the problem. And other things, just clients that they ramble. They may not necessarily be saying bad things. There's a lot of them, they'll say, judge will ask a question of whatever it is. And it's kind of like they say, well, let me tell you about these other things to give you the stage for why I'm going to answer your question the way I am. You just see the judge's eyes roll in the back of their head. So trying to say, I always tell them, yes, I want you to give a lot of details. I want you to describe things. But where that fine line is, sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge for them to see that part.
Yeah. And I think too, I mean, in our experience, a lot of times I think a lot of a lot of our clients never been in court. I mean, some of them have. Sometimes we get people spend a lot of time in court, right? but a lot of our clients just never been in court. They've never been in that setting. And yeah. I think for me, what I always try to do is appreciate, there is a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake for our clients. Like this is not a little day. They've waited a long time. They have a lot of anxiety about it, just reassuring them that we're in the best shot to have them to win. And then just, but I know what you're saying. Like sometimes you're just like, golly, they just asked your name. You're talking about in your high school graduation party where you broke your ankle or whatever. Right?
Well, sometimes it's just illogical. I think of an example of someone has bad migraines or whatever. And the judge says, well, how often are you having migraines? I get them 10 times a week. I'm thinking, okay, that's fine. Judge says, well, how long do they last? Each one? Oh, about 3 or 4 days. And you can the math just doesn't line up. And then I'm thinking, I know what they're trying to say, that it's bad. It happens all the time. But I think then the judge loses it in terms of, all right, that doesn't make any sense. Or the usual 1 out of 10 pain scale. 10 out of 10 is you're going to the emergency room. Where's your pain today? Oh, it's out of 11. Is it out of 11 every day? Yes, it is. And you can just see the judge, this is the look on their face like, all right, we just lost the judge. So just things like that sometimes.
That means you're going to lose the case, but you've lost their attention, at least for the short run.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good. Well, I'm sure we could talk a long time about these issues, but let me close with this. So you only got to tell your clients one thing. They only got to be told one thing that they could do either in the application, during the process, at the hearing. What's the one thing you tell them that they can do to have the greatest chance of winning their benefit?
I have 2, if that's all right, because they're very short.
One, you're the guest. You can have 3 if you want, but I just asked for one.
Number one, treat. Go to your doctors above all else. I mean, it seems very simplistic, but you're going to have the best case in the world that will get derailed if there's nothing there to prove it. So that is above all else. Just go to your doctors, treat, do as much as you can. I mean, there's that fine line between just blindly following your doctor versus having some say over what you're doing to yourself. But sure, treat. We need those records. The other one, I guess it's a little self-serving, but get an attorney. I know I'm not saying that because I want people to, come call Eric and, get a client, but, it's a lot more complicated than what people think. And I think that if you can have an attorney right from the start that is building the case, you're painting that picture the same from level to level to level. That's a big advantage, I think, once you get to the hearing stage. So,
yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, and that's one of the reasons. I mean, there's a number of reasons that we're doing a podcast where we're hosting disability experts, but one of them is simply to have an opportunity to let people who might not know who the best people to help them are. So, I mean, if you're in Raleigh, in North Carolina, I mean, obviously you guys do a great job. So, I wholeheartedly agree. I do think, even though it is self-serving, I agree with you, but it's still true. I do think they do better. In fact, it used to be Matt. I'm pretty sure that SSA Matt used to validate that there was a higher chance of winning if you had an attorney. So, man, it's been fun. Thank you so much for coming on my show. So we will put information for your firm, how people can get in touch with you, either in the case notes or the description below, all the social media stuff they can go to find you. Thanks for joining us on the Disability Expert Podcast. Be sure to subscribe below and tune in every week as we interview the nation's best disability experts. Thank you so much, man. Wish you the best. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you, Chad. I appreciate it.